Why you keeping me waiting? Be so long. Why you keeping me waiting? All I wanna.
Prepare to experience the strongest radio allowable by law. Secrets will be revealed. Myths dispelled. From the studio gym where excuses never apply, it's Superhuman Radio with your host, Carl Lenore.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Superhuman Radio. One of our favorite topics is the microbiome. It's like outer space. We think we know a lot about it, and then the further we dig, we find out we don't know a lot about it. We know that it has implications in health. Some think it's just a remnant of our diet. That could be true. Either way, it's an important discussion to have, and today we're going to talk about how antibiotics may affect athletic performance. Before we get started, I have to thank our title sponsor, and that's Legendary Foods, makers of the tasty pastry. It is the Pop-Tart reimagined. Less than 1 gram of sugar, 20 grams of high-quality protein, 4 to 5 net carbs if you're a carb-conscious person like I am. But they taste delicious. You taste like you're really eating cake. Adults will make exceptions. They'll go, oh, this doesn't really taste great, but it keeps me in my dietary lane. Kids won't eat something just because it's good for them. Buy a box and give your children one and watch the fight that ensues because they want more. Send them to school with them. They'll think they're eating the same crap that their friends are eating, but they're not. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary. Use the code SHR10 to save 10% off these amazingly healthy, decadent snacks. And now, without further delay, bring my two guests on, open up their microphones. Welcome to the show, Dr. Theodore Garland. There we go. Turn your mic on. Very good. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, and thank you for being here, Dr. Monica McNamara, as well.
Thank you.
So we've been talking about the effects of antibiotics tangentially on this show for years. I think the one thing that I was most fascinated about antibiotics was when I interviewed the author whose name escapes me from Missing Microbes, and we talked about the introduction of antibiotics and the trajectory of growth in the human being. And because we learned that antibiotics shifted the microbiome to extract more energy from every meal. And as a result, we had plenty of energy to grow. And we look at primitive populations. We even look at some hunter-gatherer populations that have never been exposed to antibiotics. They're all, median height, 4 feet. So I thought that was fascinating. That started me thinking about the relationship that we have with these friends of ours. I kind of feel like microbes needed hands to pick things up. They needed teeth to mash stuff up. They needed a vehicle, and we became their vehicle. And now we live symbiotically with them, supplying them with what they want, and they help us when we do the right thing. They help us be healthy, but when we don't do the right thing, they can actually help create disease states. Why this study? Why did you have to look at the effects of antibiotics on athleticism? Who wants to start with that?
Well, I guess I can start with a little more general background. Our lab does what we call evolutionary physiology. So we're interested in how organisms work, how they behave, the nuts and bolts. But we also want to understand how that's changed and evolved over time. How did humans come to be the way they are, both in the brain and the body and so forth. And so years ago, I was casting about for a convenient sort of model system in which to study that. And, you think about mice because they're, I guess, really the best known mammal, even better known than humans in some ways. They're easy to work with in the lab. It's easy to score their behavior, study their physiology. We have lots of wonderful genetic tools now, and of course, the microbiome tools. So we decided that we would selectively breed mice, so an experimental evolution approach for high levels of voluntary exercise on wheels. And that's easy to do. You just hook up the wheels to computers and have them automatically counted and so forth. And we have actually 4 of these separate lines that are bred for running, and then 4 other lines that are not couch potatoes, not selected for low levels of running, but just maintained as control. So they're like your average mouse, you might say. They're perfectly healthy and everything. And then over the decades, the experiment's been going on almost 30 years. We have looked at both the motivation for exercise. What is it that makes a little mouse jump on a wheel at night and run, 10 miles or something like that? And what has changed in their physical abilities, their muscles, their heart, their lung, their blood, that kind of thing. And so in doing those studies, this eventually led us to think about the microbiome. And, that's where Monica had come into the lab. She had some interest in this, and she started getting ideas about things we could do. And I think I'd sort of hand it over to Monica there.
Yeah. So when I met Ted, we talked about the microbiome and realized this is an awesome area of research that has not been explored before in these high runner mice. So that's how we first got onto the topic of microbiome with super athletic mice. And for this study in particular with antibiotics, we know from previous studies that the microbiome is important for behavior, and it can even affect muscle physiology. So we wanted to see what would antibiotics do to voluntary exercise behavior. And this is a topic that has received very little attention in the literature so far. And so we have this awesome model of mice. We were going to see what happens when we place them on antibiotics. So that was the initial thought process for this study.
So one of the fascinating things about the paper was that the actual attitude towards expending energy changed. So I mean, I can understand the efficiency of the body to do certain things because the microbiome has been altered. Like I said before, we know that antibiotics changed how we utilize and metabolize energy, for food. But what I was really fascinated by was that the willingness to even get up and move changed. Now, we've talked about how the microbes in our gut produce chemicals that influence our brain and our actions. Like I've talked about craving. Craving starts because the bugs in our gut, and look, I'm not a scientist, so I'm really sloppy about it. But the bugs in our gut, when we pass the Starbucks, squirt something out that gets to the brain. We know that along the vagus nerve there is also a nerve that seems to bring things from the stomach, chemicals into the brain. And you go, oh, let me stop and get a cup of coffee. And the stronger the chemical that we desire, the stronger the urge to stop and get it. And this is why people can't pass a Starbucks without getting a cup of coffee. I mean, it really is a chemical reaction. So is that what's happening with the lazy couch potato? Like, oh, I don't want to get up because these chemicals are telling me to stay seated? Or is it the lack of chemicals that influence our desire to move more?
Go ahead.
That's a great question. We wish we knew the answer to that. I'll let Monica give some ideas there,
Well,
but you threw out a bunch of possibilities.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about chemicals that you mentioned and microbes. So microbes can signal to the brain indirectly through the vagus nerve, like you talked about. So they can alter chemical productions. I'm also thinking of like short chain fatty acid production. This is a microbial byproduct that is involved in appetite control and alterations of hormones that could potentially influence our desire to pick up Starbucks on the way home.
Are you talking about things like butyrate now when you say that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So butyrate, propionate, acetate, those are the three main short chain fatty acid produced by bacteria.
And butyrate also contributes to the production of ketone bodies, which is an alternate substrate that the body likes to use, which brings me to the discussion about fat in the diet and stuff like that, because I know that, the standard American diet is blamed for a lot of things. And we don't necessarily tease out, we say fat and sugar is a problem. But if you look at a Mediterranean diet and you look at a ketogenic diet, fat isn't a problem. I guess until it's mixed with sugar. Does something change in the microbiome? Are we feeding bad microbes simply by putting simple sugars in our stomach that can be devoured right there? They don't have to be metabolized and sent downstream further?
So we do actually have a study where we looked at a Western diet that was high in fat and sugar, separate from this antibiotic paper. This paper came out in January 2021. And we had a group of our high runner and control mice from all of our lines. We separated them into groups with standard diet or Western diet. And the Western diet was 14% kilojoules from fat and 42% kilojoules from fat and 34% added sucrose by weight for the Western diet group. And then we had mice with or without wheel access during early life. So these mice were 3 weeks old. They had this exposure to Western diet and or exercise for 3 weeks, followed by a long washout period. So this was 6 weeks washout period. And then we looked at the microbiome as adults. And we found that a Western diet as a juvenile significantly reduced the bacterial diversity in the gut. And we could talk about what diversity means in terms of the microbiome.
Diversity, yeah, because we hear this term a lot, right? But it matters because what microbes should we be looking to see, and what microbes should we want to get rid of?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we're still figuring out what is a healthy, perfect gut microbiome. And I also mentioned with diversity, we have in the gut microbiome a lot of functional redundancy. So one species can do one job, another species does another job. So if you lose one, maybe they did the same job. So it's not that important that you lost this one particular species. So with diversity, I think it's not entirely clear if decreased diversity is 100% bad. It's likely negative. We don't want to lose species. We might be losing some important function or some beneficial species. But I would say we're still doing research on the importance of diversity for the gut microbiome.
I think there's a tendency in a lot of studies in fields that are sort of new to want to emphasize the bad things that you find or the apparent negative effects. So, we did something that changed the microbiome, and there's kind of a presumption that that's bad. But, organisms are able to adapt in a positive way to things like changes in diet or temperature or what have you. And, it's conceivable that a number of these microbiome changes are actually positive. So I think you have to be pretty careful when you do an experiment and you find a change, and, you don't want to leap to the conclusion that it's necessarily bad. And one thing Monica didn't mention was that these studies with the early life effects in mice, they were going from the time of weaning from the mother up to sexual maturity. So that's like, a kid that's 12 or something. And then by taking away the Western diet treatment and the ability to exercise on the wheels for 8 weeks, that's like several years in a human. So it's like getting you up into college. And then the question was, are there echoes, lingering effects, haunting effects of these early life experiences that could be bad or good? And we've shown in previous studies, and also Monica's, that early life exercise opportunity actually makes you more likely to exercise as an adult. And we think that's important because, as you know, physical education is one of the things that was sort of cut out of schools way back when due to budget cuts, when they were removing band and so forth and so on. And that may have been sort of a disastrous public health decision, because now we have people that because they didn't exercise, 5 days a week in school or elementary school, they're now less likely to exercise voluntarily as adults. And of course, voluntary exercise, the reason we've been interested in that is because it's so important for human health.
Joel Green, who is watching live, and he's a well-written author. He talks a lot about the immune system and body fat accumulation. Has a question I'm going to pop up here real quick, and if you can't see, I'm going to read it. So the question is the potential positives of antibiotics. Examples: I guess E-mycin is erythromycin, and senolysis. I guess that's a term of senolytics. Doxycycline, yeah, and even erythromycin. That's it. That's the Z-Pack, right? No, zithromycin. Fast twitch muscle repletion. Any thoughts on the selective use of them for longevity?
Well, I don't know about longevity, but it sounds like Joel is referring to the loss of muscle mass that typically occurs with aging, which is given the technical term of sarcopenia. And that's something that we all experience, and it's exacerbated by things like hospital stays where you have to be physically inactive for a week or two. And it's kind of like a one-way street. It's a locking ratchet mechanism down. And I think maybe he's suggesting that antibiotics might have a beneficial effect on increasing the amount of muscle, at least certain fiber types, as he's referring to fast twitch. Now, whether that would increase longevity in terms of your lifespan, how long you live, who knows? But it seems like that would have the possibility of increasing what's often referred to as health span. So how long in your life you can remain healthy, physically vigorous, and mentally acute and so forth.
Yeah, because we know they use antibiotics in raising bovine to make them have more muscle. And again, I think that comes from the fact that they are probably able to scavenge more nutrition out of everything they eat, kind of like the discussion I had at the beginning of the show with missing microbes. Also, not for this particular show, but we've examined the use of certain doxycycline and zithromycin, and actually the FDA has now approved zithromycin as a senolytic because it will rid the body of senescent cells, and senescent cells also impair muscle function, which impairs the ability to exercise. Blah blah blah. So there's a lot more going on in that question. I would imagine that it probably isn't just for this show. So antibiotics ravage the microbiome. One of the things that I learned when I interviewed Dr. Satish Rao about the use of Xifaxan in treating a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth is that microbes don't necessarily die, they spore to protect themselves, and they can go into a state of suspended animation. And in fact, he talked about the fact that his therapeutic approach of 28 or 38 days of Xifaxan to rid people of SIBO was predicated on them continuing to eat the crappy food that made them bloated, because the microbes were eating the Xifaxan along with it, and that is what killed them. So a shift in diet can make microbes spore and go into suspended animation. They wake up again once you change your diet. Does this happen with antibiotics? Do they just spore, or did we just wipe out something that we'll never have again?
Well, in this study, we didn't examine the microbiome, but it's definitely a possibility that all or a large chunk of that community was wiped out and it will never recover. So it would be great to do a study where we treated them with this broad spectrum cocktail of antibiotics and then examine who in the community is not coming back and what importance that might have.
Yeah, I should point out that this research was being done right as sort of COVID was hitting, and so some of the additional studies that we were hoping to do at the time, such as transplants, of the high runner microbiome into the regular mice and vice versa, or looking at longer term recovery. We just had to stop those. We couldn't have people in the lab and so forth. And Monica had to finish the dissertation and get on to the next stage of her life. So we're hoping that we can pick some of those up in the future.
Is there any evidence that the microbiome? Okay, so I have to be careful how I couch this question. We know that vaginal birth and breastfeeding imparts a great deal of microbiome seeding. In fact, it's not just from the breast milk, but the areola delivers a great deal of this to the baby. But we have this sterile world today, and C-sections. I was a C-section baby, and my mother didn't breastfeed because back in the 50s when I was born, they were told that formula was better than breast milk, and they believed it. Are the microbes in our gut to any degree, other than being seeded, traveling through the womb, the vaginal canal, or breastfeeding, transgenerational? Do we have transgenerational seeding, or let's say propensity to see the same microbes in my gut that my great grandfather had, even though he lived in Italy and I live in the United States?
I can think of, yeah.
I was just going to make one comment, which is that your microbe community, of course, is not just a function of what opportunities you have to take things in. So, environmental exposures and seeding, as you say. It also is going to be influenced by your inherent characteristics, such as, we vary in body temperature. Some people run hotter than others. If you exercise more, you're going to have periods of the day when you're at higher temperatures, and that might increase your food consumption. You mentioned diet. So, and then, your diet choices are influenced not only by what your parents hand to you, but also genetic propensities. It's well known that variation in diet preferences have a substantial genetic component. And so it's really complicated to think about, okay, so my grandfather did X, Y, and Z, and part of the reason they did that was their genes. And so then they had a particular microbiome, which, as you say, got, probably shared with the grandmother and then seeded from the grandmother to your parents. And then some of that was carried forward, but there are also the genes that your parents had, which influence various characteristics, maybe your hormone levels, that influence the microbiome. So teasing apart what's coming from environmental exposures and seeding versus what is being repetitively influenced by innate individual differences in body chemistry, hormones, body temperature, diet preferences, that's really complicated to do.
Right. Were you going to say something, Dr. McNamara?
I was going to add, I've seen a few studies in mice where they have different strains of mice they bring into one lab room, and they look at the microbiome over multiple generations. And some strains do have many species that are shared over multiple generations, even when housed in the same facility.
Yeah. I mean, we're learning everything else has some sort of transgenerational epigenetic effect now. The things, the chemicals that my great grandfather or great grandmother came in contact with will work their way into his germ cells or her ovarian cells, and now that's 5 generations deep. We have that. We know that, especially from a lot of the Vietnam vets who were exposed to Agent Orange and stuff like that, that their grandchildren are having problems like they were exposed to it. And it wouldn't surprise me if there's some sort of transgenerational capacity for the microbes, because a lot of times we get the same diseases, even though we ate different foods than our great grandparents. And, it's like, where did that come from? And I know everybody says it's genetic, but I got to be honest with you. I've been doing this show for 16 years, and I have had the opportunity to interview the brightest minds in science, like yourselves, that are on the bleeding edge of stuff that people won't hear about for 10 years. And I'm starting to realize that what we do with our genes is way, way more important than what genes we got. And we see that in monozygotic breast cancer twin studies, where one sister gets the breast cancer, the other doesn't. And why? And it's because one had a completely different life and lifestyle and exposure to things than the other one did. So anyway, so what were the microbes specifically that were associated with athleticism? Can one of you speak to that?
Yes, I can mention a few. We have another study we're working on in weaning mice that we're hoping to find some interesting associations between the high runners and controls. And we did find that one family, Clostridiaceae, which is found within Bacteroidetes, was significantly higher in the high runner mice. So maybe there's something interesting there. That's one family. We would love to do more studies and maybe find additional lower level differences such as genera and taxa and species. But for the literature in general, there have been a few trends. Exercise tends to increase some of the butyrate producing bacteria. A few studies have shown that. And a few other additional studies have mentioned the genus Faenella and Akkermansia. Those have come up a few times in the literature.
I'm laughing because Joel Green talked about Akkermansia on my show 5.5 years ago. And now there are Akkermansia supplements, and he and I laugh about it. But we first talked about Akkermansia back then. Joel teaches people how to increase Akkermansia by increasing the consumption of things like red polyphenols along with apple skin peels and green bananas. And you know, his book, The Immunity Code, is amazing. But yeah, I know. I laugh every time we see an ad for Akkermansia. I'll text Joel and say 5.5 years ago, I guess we should have started selling this stuff, right? But so is there any role? You know what? We have 2 minutes. This is going to be a long question. We're going to take our commercial break 2 minutes early. When we come back, I want to talk about the mitochondria and the microbiome and the effects of athleticism on exercise from antibiotics. Stay tuned. You are watching and listening to Superhuman Radio. We'll be right back. There have been no new innovations in men's underwear for hundreds of years. That's all about to change with Sheath. Sheath creates 2 separate compartments for your man stuff so it doesn't get smashed into a mound and sweaty and stinky. I won't wear any other underwear now that I've learned about Sheath, and you won't either. Go to shrnetwork.biz/Sheath underwear. That's SHEATHUNDERWEAR. Use code SUPERHUMAN to save 20% off. I promise you, once you try a pair of Sheath underwear, you will never wear anything else. Remember those rectangular toaster pastries you used to love when you were a kid? Well, Legendary Foods has just made them better. The new cake-style tasty pastry is like nothing you've ever had before. With 20 grams of high-quality protein and less than 1 gram of sugar, you'll feel like you're cheating, but you're not. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use the code SHR10 to save 10% off your purchase of tasty pastries. Now available in cookies and cream, red velvet cake, birthday cake, blueberry, strawberry, brown sugar cinnamon, and hot fudge sundae. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use code SHR10 today. Are you suffering from signs of an unhappy gut? Diversity is the key to healthy, robust inner ecosystem. Body Ecology probiotic liquids are made by fermenting organic seeds, biodynamic brown rice, and chickpeas together to create a diverse culture found nowhere else on Earth. It's the secret to restoring your gut's microbiome for a healthier digestive tract, improved immune function, and longevity. Take 20% off by visiting the website shrnetwork.biz/bodyeco. shrnetwork.biz/bodyeco. That's BODYECO. And using the code SHR20. Hey, you've heard me talk about mass zymes from Bioptimizers for years now. It's a safe and natural digestive enzyme supplement that's for men or women that specifically helps you digest the protein in your diet. I never have a meal without at least 3 Masszyme capsules, and that's because I want every bit of amino acids from the protein I eat day in and day out to help this 64-year-old body continue to build new muscle and strength. Well, I can tell you how you can get a free bottle of Masszymes plus 3 free ebooks as a bonus, total gift worth over $81. You'll not only receive a free bottle of the best digestive enzyme for turning all the protein you eat into muscle-building amino acids, but you'll also receive the book From Sick to Superhuman, Plant-Based Superfood Delights, and the Ultimate Carnivore Cookbook, absolutely free with your free bottle of Masszymes. Take advantage of this opportunity fast because it won't last long. Go to shrnetwork.biz/free-mass-me, that's FREEMASSME, and see why I will never stop taking Masszymes.
Dogs should be powered by fat and protein, not carbs. That's why Visionary Pet makes low-carb, ketogenic dog food for dogs of all breeds and life stages. From kibble to freeze-dried and even low-carb treats, all Visionary Pet recipes are very low-carb, ketogenic, and made with 100% real meat protein. Shop now and use code SHR for 20% off your first order today. Your dog deserves the lifelong benefits of optimal nutrition. Make the switch to Visionary and see why smart dogs eat low carb.
I would easily say that I am the hugest proponent you will ever meet to doing anything that will improve the quality of my sleep. And that's because sleep is linked to just about every metabolic disorder we see in our population today. One of the easiest things you can do to improve the quality of your sleep is to get a pillow that can be shaped into the exact form factor that allows you to get your best night's sleep. And that is MyPillow. I've been sleeping with MyPillow for a few years now, and I can tell you that when I have to travel and stay in hotels, I don't get a good night's sleep because I don't have MyPillow with me. Right now, you can save up to 60% off of everything offered to improve the quality of your sleep at shrnetwork.biz/MyPillow when you use the code SHR. Or you can call toll-free 800-889-4938. And remember to use code SHR to save up to 60% off of everything at their website.
You're listening to the Superhuman Channel. Don't hate us because we feel good.
Hey, welcome back. I gotta plug a sponsor. Many of you know that I like to imbibe alcohol from time to time, but I have a problem. If I can't just have one. Some of you saw my bottle of tequila for 4th of July. I drank 2/3 of a bottle of tequila in one night. And that's always what happens when I start drinking alcohol. Like 1 is great, 2 is better. Surely 3 and 4 has to be better than that. I have to stop drinking alcohol. No one's told me to, but it doesn't fit my mission. I'm getting stronger again, training harder, and I don't want to derail myself. And I got to tell you about this stuff here. And it's called Botanic Tonics. It's a plant-based herbal supplement that at 1/3 of a bottle, I can use it. It gives me a great deal of focus, puts me in the zone, also has some analgesic benefits. I train harder with it, but a half a bottle gives me a buzz and allows me to, go out and not really feel like drinking alcohol. It's great stuff. You have to try it. They're selling over 1 million bottles a month, and they've only been around for a year and a half. And you know why that is? Because it does what it says it's going to do. Go to shrnetwork.biz/feel-free and use the code SHR40 for 40% off. Try it once. I promise you, if you try it once, you'll want to have it in the house for the weekends and obviously to use right before some of those harder training sessions. And now back to our show. We're talking with Dr. Theodore Garland and Dr. Monica McNamara about antibiotics and how they affect the microbiome and your athletic abilities. What about the mitochondria? The mitochondria finds its way into everything. Does the chemicals or the lack thereof affect mitochondrial output and efficiency? Maybe mitochondrial uncoupling. Maybe that's why people feel like they don't want to move because movement is harder. Any interplay here with this discussion?
I have seen a few papers on mitochondria and byproducts from bacterial fermentation now. So as we talked about before, bacteria can produce these short chain fatty acids from fermentation of fiber, and they can have beneficial effects on mitochondrial activity and therefore potentially energy production. So there's a paper from 2009 where they did 12 weeks of dietary supplementation with butyrate in dietary obese mice. And they found that they had an increased ratio of type 1 fibers in their calf muscles and increased spontaneous physical activity. And there's another paper that also looked at butyrate addition to diet in older mice who found that the ones with butyrate had significantly less hind limb muscle mass compared to regular mice, as well as elevated markers of mitochondrial biogenesis.
Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah. So there's a whole industry out there now of ketone supplements. I'm sure you're aware of it. Do you think that supplementing with ketones would impart some of that same effect?
I'm not too sure. I'd have to do a little bit more research on the topic for ketones.
What do you think, Dr. Garland?
That's sort of outside of my sphere of knowledge.
So during the commercial break, when I was talking about my propensity to drink too much alcohol once I get started, Dr. Garland messaged me in the chat area and said, as Mae West said, too much of a good thing can be wonderful. That was good. That was very good. Very, very good and very appropriate. Yeah, I have to stop drinking. And I also gravitate towards very, very strong drinks. I drink Negronis. I learned how to make my own margaritas now, and it's not working out good for me. So are either of you familiar with a peptide? It's a cathelicidin called LL37 that the body produces as a downstream metabolite of sun exposure and D production in the skin.
I am not.
So it's in first or second trial experiments to be used in antibiotic resistant pathogens. And like I said, it's produced by being in the sun, which I don't know if you could tell, but I love the sun. I lay out as often as possible. What about these things that our body produces that have antimicrobial, antibacterial actions? Do they do the same thing in maybe threatening the microbiome?
Well, over millions of years of evolution, you expect there to be some sort of appropriate balance, if you will. You've got the coevolution of the microbe community with the host. But anytime you have rapid change in environmental conditions, which could include, migrating from one part of the world to another, changes in diet, changes in the frequency of social interactions and exchange of microbes, and we travel a lot. We go to places where, for me, it's not just like don't drink the water when you go overseas. It's, almost anytime I travel, even within the U.S. and go to a different restaurant and so forth, I often get some, intestinal changes, as it were. And it's going to be a sort of weird situation where, that's not long enough for the microbiome to, evolve and the human host to evolve with it. I mean, that's going to take generations for the human, many years for the humans to evolve, even though the bacteria can be evolving rapidly and then re-evolving back to a different state. So, where you expect the balance to be when we have rapid environmental changes compared to what we used to face back in the caveman days, it's difficult to know, but there's a general idea that if organisms are exposed to new environmental conditions that they've not experienced for their recent evolutionary history, that could be problematic.
Dr. McNamara, you have anything you want to add?
No, that was great. The environmental exposures and microbe relationship is complicated. It's hard to see evolution in microbes.
So we talked about a study on this show probably about 8 years ago that looked at your proximity to the equator and the diversity of your microbiome. And they looked at the firmicutes and bacteriodetes because one of them has been associated with obesity and one of them has been associated with lean individuals. And I never can get it right. Is it the bacteroidetes that are associated
So
with leanness?
obesity is associated with decrease in bacteroidetes. So yes, associated with leanness.
And so the closer you get to the equator, there's more firmicutes. The further away you get from the equator, there's more bacteroidetes, or vice versa. So there's more obesity as you move away from sunny climate and less obesity. Does the sun play a role in the diversity of our microbes?
I have not read any studies on that topic, but I think that's really interesting perspective, and I'd be interested to read more on that.
I mean, you know, I remember when I moved to Las Vegas, I was like 21 years old, and I just remembered thinking to myself, you know, there's really no fat people out here. And the same thing when I lived in Arizona. But then over time that changed. Like now you can go to either of those people and see nothing but fat people. But I often wondered after talking about this study 8 years ago, if the sun gives you a leg up if your desire is to be lean. And now we understand why it could be, because it may change the diversity of the microbes in your gut. So I just always thought that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, there are so many correlated differences there. You know, if you're in a sunnier climate, the weather in general may just be more conducive to being outside, maybe more conducive to exercising. You know, I failed to grow up in Las Vegas, I like to say. And I also lived in Wisconsin for 14 years. And I can tell you, not being a real snow kind of ice person, you know, I wasn't exercising for many months out of the year in Wisconsin.
Right.
And that's going to have obviously a potentially large effect on maintenance of body weight and so forth. You know, you're stuck inside when it's cold out. Eating is one of the things you can do to give yourself a dopamine surge.
Yeah.
But if you're in a better climate, you can potentially go out and play tennis or basketball or just take a walk.
Right.
And so, you know, there's so many correlated things that go along with latitude or the amount of sunshine or what have you, that it's, you know, with human beings, it's really difficult to tease those out. I mean, they do epidemiological studies where they try to account for all these different co-varying factors. But, you know, for us, we don't really study humans. And so with mice, you can control a lot of these things. You know, you can control the diet. You can control the amount of the photo period. You control all sorts of things and try to get down, you know, to ferret out individual factors that might be important in something like the microbiome diversity or voluntary exercise.
Once the microbiome shifted to the more causing the athletic mouse to become more docile and lazy, did it ever go back to normal? Or once the antibiotics did their job, you're screwed?
Yeah, we did not find any recovery in our mice. So after the antibiotic treatment, the mice remained with wheel access on tap water. Antibiotics were removed, and we found no recovery to the pre-antibiotics levels for high runners and no difference for controls.
Now, you think that if the mice were forced to start exercising, you would see any shift?
Potentially. Yeah, Ted, do you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, and in Monica's study, as I was mentioning earlier, we weren't able to continue the recovery period or the potential recovery period on very long. We just went for a couple of weeks, and they didn't recover within that time period, but, you know, maybe within a couple of months they would have. We also didn't make any attempt to reseed them, you know, like with feces from other mice, or we had actually collected feces from the mice before the start of the study, hoping that we would be able to do a transplant, but, you know, kibosh was put on that by the global pandemic. And so, you know, it's going to be future studies where we look to see if they can recover. You know, it would be really interesting if they had a permanent hit and they sort of never recovered within what amounts to several years for a mouse. And you know, that gets back to the potential importance of early life factors. You know, if you have things you're experiencing early in life, like a poor diet, Western diet, and that kind of haunts you almost forever, that's a bad thing, you know, and it's hopefully the possibility of this kind of thing will hopefully make parents pay a little more attention to, you know, what they're feeding their kids and how they're encouraging them to exercise or not.
Yeah, I was a very fat kid up until I was 13. I lived in an area of Brooklyn that was very, very dangerous, Bedford-Stuyvesant. And so the neighborhood got so dangerous that I wasn't allowed to go out and play. So I would come home from school. I would sit down in front of the TV. I'd watch Officer Joe Bolton and the Three Stooges, and I watch all and then I'd eat, and I consumed milk like it was going. I mean, I drank a half a gallon of milk a day. My father used to say, "Carl, we're gonna have to buy a cow. Like we can't keep up with your milk consumption." And then I found myself. I lost a lot of weight. We moved to a nice neighborhood. I started playing handball. I was getting out more. And then I had children, and I put on pound for pound. Every pound that my ex-wife put on, I put on with her. And then I was hospitalized at 39 years old and told I was going to need a pacemaker. And that was the wake-up call for me. And I lost 100 pounds. It took a while because I didn't look at it like a fad diet. I changed my life. I stopped eating late in the evenings. Like today, 6 p.m., I'm done chewing my food. I'm done. I'm in bed at 9. I get up first thing in the morning. I do cardio. I train. I go to the gym and I train. I usually train fasted. Then I'm combining. My sleep patterns, time restricted feeding, grueling exercise. I'm 64 years old. I train really, really hard. I lift heavy weight. And my diet is spot on, except when I start drinking. But I've never gained the weight back. So I kind of feel like there's got to be a way to influence those little bugs in your gut to get on board with the new lifestyle. At least it seems to be for humans. Maybe social constructs make us. I don't want to be fat anymore. And little mice don't care about it. I don't know, but I have to believe that there's some hope for those people out there who were bombarded with antibiotics and find themselves not energetic and eating a lot and putting on weight constantly to free themselves from those chains. What do you think?
Well, the adherence, even if medical doctors prescribe exercise, which they should do more frequently, getting people to adhere to that sort of prescription is really difficult. I mean, a lot of people won't even adhere to, taking some important regimen of medication, statins or something. And getting them to adhere to something where they actually have to get off their butts, go outside, put on their shoes, go outside and exercise. And if they live in a situation where what they like to call the built environment doesn't include a safe place to exercise, or they can't afford a gym membership, I mean, that's just not going to work for a lot of people. And one of the reasons we've been doing this research over the years is to try to find the factors that determine why, at least at this point in your life, I won't say you love to exercise, but you do it. And I'm guessing you do it partly because you enjoy it. Now, of course, there's this other part, like, I don't want to die, And
no, I say it's medicine. There's many days, like I have a gym at home and I go to a commercial gym periodically. And there's many days where I have horrible aches and pains, and I'm the average 64-year-old. Things are starting to hurt me. And I walk into the gym and I feel like, maybe I'll just go home. And then once I'm done with that workout, I walk out like King Kong, and I think that's my medicine. That I don't take the pills. This is my medicine.
Well, there's a whole movement in human exercise physiology that's termed exercise is medicine. And so I was just recently at the American College of Sports Medicine conference down in San Diego, and they have whole sessions on this. Really, for a while there was kind of a fad that people wanted to discover the so-called exercise pill. Mm-hmm. Well, no pill is going to be able to stimulate all of the things that are stimulated with physical activity. You don't want a pill that's going to make your heart rate go up a lot. You don't want to make a pill that's going to make you, breathe heavily, sweat, all that stuff. I mean, you want to get that sort of naturally. And I don't think there'll ever be really efficient exercise mimetics that some people are going after. I think the key is finding ways to motivate people to exercise and making are neighborhoods conducive to being able to exercise, that sort of thing.
And I'll add that the gut microbiome has been suggested to regulate reward processes, so that could potentially be a link to motivation from bacteria that are in our gut.
We have to take our last commercial break, and then we're going to wrap up the interview. But when we come back, I'll tell you the story, because I interviewed the scientist who published the paper that became viral on the internet. And he was so resentful because what he did somehow perversely got translated to skip the gym and have another glass of wine. We'll talk about that, because he was on my show, and he was so disgusted, and he was so glad that he got to come on a show and actually talk about his paper. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with more Superhuman Radio. Are you 35 or older? Every year after puberty, your growth hormone decreases, sometimes by 50% by the age of 35, and it only keeps going down from there. This affects everything from making it harder to recover from workouts, sleep, and a general loss of a sense of well-being. It also affects your ability to get and stay lean. BioPro Plus is the first of its kind, 100% non-synthetic alternative to prescription synthetic growth hormone treatments. All the benefits without any of the needles or side effects, and 100% safe. Previously only available through doctors, you can go to shrnetwork.biz/biopro, that's BIOPRO, and use code SHR30 for $30 off today.
New Mass Pro Synthogen X2 just upped its own legendary game. To distance itself even further from the rest of the pack, Synthogen X2 now has double the key active ingredients. If you've ever wondered what steroid-like recovery feels like, Synthogen X2 delivers. See why others compare it favorably to powerful bodybuilding drugs at synthogen.com. Mass Pro Synthogen. When you train with it, you'll gain with it.
The Hercules pre-workout from Lost Empire Herbs is like no pre-workout you have ever had before. Completely natural formula designed specifically to optimize workouts, provide quicker recovery time, provide adequate nutrition, and get you away from all those no-good, overstimulating pre-workout supplements on the market today. The Hercules pre-workout blend is a mix of extracted natural herbs and mineral pitch. No fake colors, no added flavors, nothing else. Not only will Hercules pre-workout formula help your workouts, but you'll likely discover lots and lots of side effects, beneficial side effects. Go to shrnetwork.biz/Lost Empire today to learn more. GHKCU is one of the most effective peptides for rebuilding more youthful skin, reversing skin damage, diminishing wrinkles, and tightening loose skin. I personally use Restoracell with GHKCU every day. It's making an undeniable difference in the quality of my skin. Restoracell is fantastic for all types of skin. Now you can order Restoracell and save 25% when you use the code SHR25. That's SHR25. While you may be diligent in your workouts and your diet, don't neglect what people see first and foremost, and that's your skin. Go to shrnetwork.biz/blue and use code SHR25 today. Being superhuman means being conscientious about the choices we make. White Oak Pastures is superhuman when it comes to raising livestock. They're committed to animal welfare, land regeneration, and rural revival. They responsibly manage the entire process from the pasture to your doorstep. High-quality, pasture-raised, great-tasting meat from a farm you can trust. Full nose-to-tail selections. They even have options for your pet. Go to shrnetwork.biz/whiteoak and use the code SUPERHUMAN to save 10% off your entire first order. Are you suffering from signs of an unhappy gut? Diversity is the key to healthy, robust inner ecosystem. Body Ecology probiotic liquids are made by fermenting organic seeds, biodynamic brown rice, and chickpeas together to create a diverse culture found nowhere else on Earth. It's the secret to restoring your gut's microbiome for a healthier digestive tract, improved immune function, and longevity. Take 20% off by visiting the website shrnetwork.biz/bodyeco. shrnetwork.biz/bodyeco. That's BODYECO. And using the code SHR20.
This is the Superhuman Channel. Evolution just got kicked up a notch.
Welcome back We're talking with Dr. Theodore Garland and Dr. Monica McNamara about the effects of antibiotics on the gut microbiome and how that influences your ability to be athletic and love moving more. It's really fascinating. It's sad. So real quick, it was probably about 5 or 6 years ago when resveratrol was all the rage, and they were calling it an exercise mimetic, as you used the term a second ago. And the doctor who published the study came on the show after the Daily Mirror, a UK newspaper, published an article that said, skip the gym and have another glass of wine, and then went on to extrapolate that wine has resveratrol. And he came on the show, and in the first 5 minutes, the poor guy, he was so flustered. He said, you would have to drink 1,000 bottles of wine a day to get the amount of resveratrol that we gave to those rodents to see the effects that we saw. And that's the sad thing, because to get funding for science nowadays, there's a lot of clickbaiting that has to happen to get people to pay attention. Now, my next, I have two questions, two final questions. We have done shows on the effects of hormones and their symbiotic relationship with microbes, like L-reuteri increases oxytocin production, or oxytocin increases the amount of L-reuteri in the gut. We know that those women who have estrogen dominance tend to have a higher degree of certain microbes in their gut. So there seems to be a relationship between, and is it the chicken and the egg? Are the hormones increasing the microbes? Are the microbes helping to increase the hormones? We don't know. But in 2007, when I got on testosterone therapy, I had all sorts of energy. I felt like somebody turned the lights back on in my life. Could there be a link between these microbes and certain hormones that make you want to get up and move, give you energy?
I think that's a possibility. Definitely. That's definitely a bidirectional relationship between gut hormones and bacteria. There's definitely crosstalk there. And it's a new field, I would say. So I haven't seen too many studies yet on hormones and bacteria. So I'm excited to see where this goes.
Yeah, I mean, you can obviously get at that sort of thing, especially with rodents in the lab. I mean, it happens faster. You can have bigger sample sizes. You can control all the other stuff. And it's not that hard to do studies where you dose rodents with certain hormones or microbes, and you look at the effect on the other. You can do longitudinal designs where you follow it through time. But as Monica is saying, this field is exploding. If you look at the number of scientific publications that involve the microbiome, it's going viral. It's going exponential, and we're going to see so many new results coming out over the coming years. It's hard to keep track of the number of studies right now.
Just an interesting dot connection. So we did a show years ago about old rodents that were given high doses of oxytocin, and their muscles were injured, and they healed faster than young rodents, which imply, and the name of that study was making old rodents' muscles young again. And then we did a show about L-reuteri and its relationship to oxytocin in humans. And I thought, wow, isn't this fascinating? Now, I personally inject 50 IUs of oxytocin at bedtime, along with a bunch of other peptides that help me get into really deep sleep, and I sleep great. But we did a show last year with Israeli scientists who published a study that showed it's not estrogen that increases bone mineralization in women, but estrogen's ability to raise oxytocin. And it is oxytocin that keeps you from developing osteoporosis and osteopenia. And so I just think when you start looking at all these, they take like a 30,000 foot, and you go, wait a minute, this could all be because of a microbe missing in your gut, that you don't have oxytocin, your bones are getting thin, your muscles are starting to fail. It's just so fascinating. It really, really is.
Yeah, and
What
when
about
you design these studies, it's hard to, it's hard to think of all the things you'd like to measure, when you start messing around with the microbiome. And, sometimes it's not till the experiment's done and then a paper comes out and says, oh, wow, I wish I'd measured testosterone or something like that. And
right?
plus, you just can't measure everything in one study. I mean, funding agencies, don't sort of give you a fishing license, and reviewers of scientific papers don't want to see you taking fishing expeditions. They tend to force you to have fairly narrow hypotheses about what you think is going to be responding, and kind of force you to go after that. So
Right. So the world of probiotics is exploded. People are more interested in fermented foods than ever before. Do you think there's any value to this in this discussion? Can we supplement or eat foods that are fermented to help seed, or is it a waste of time? They don't stay in us. They pass right through.
I would say there's a handful of studies on probiotics in humans coming out, and a few have shown that you can potentially increase runtime to exhaustion. I remember seeing in one paper. And also I'll mention that probiotics could potentially improve other symptoms like gastrointestinal symptoms that athletes often have. It could also potentially help upper respiratory tract infections, helping get less. But probiotics, it's a challenge, like you mentioned. For some people, it might do nothing and the bacteria just go straight through, and your microbiome is already in a good spot where these additional bacteria you're adding aren't going to do anything. But if, let's say, you just took antibiotics and you're in a dysbiotic state, probiotics could potentially help you restore back to your normal gut microbiome. So I think we need more research on the topic, especially in athletes, but it's a possibility.
My mother was in a nursing home in Arizona, and she got C. diff real bad. And God, this is probably 9 years ago, at least. And they said, does anybody live here? Any relatives? And my niece Kelly lived there, and she was very healthy. And she did a fecal transplant, saved my mother's life.
Yeah, how amazing is that? Bacteria can save lives.
Well, and then shortly thereafter, I read about a company that was taking the fecal transplant oral by freeze drying and enterically encoding the fecal matter with and they were sterilizing it and purifying it and isolating it and standardizing it, so you didn't have to do that fecal transplant. You could just take a couple of these and they would survive the gut and they'd get down into where they belong before they opened up. And I never heard about them anymore. But I would imagine that that's happening. I think they're doing that now there's a company called Pearls that does probiotics that way. It doesn't open up in your gut. It opens up further downstream. So I think we're getting better at getting them where they need to be. What do you think?
Delivering them, yes.
Yeah.
And I think this is an interesting future area of research for biotech companies. How are we going to market safe fecal microbiota transplants to people?
yeah, and I'm sure there's a lot of interactions with diet. So, as Monica was mentioning, it works for some people and others it seems to have no effect. And that, you're not controlling for what people are eating. And it probably is the case that if you're going to be trying to improve things with probiotics and so forth, you're going to also have to think about, get them on a good diet, or a diet that is conducive to promoting the growth of particular bacterial taxa. And I don't think anybody's taking those kind of approaches to the study right now.
In fact, I studied human breast milk because I formulated a product years and years ago. And the HMOs in mother's milk are not for the baby, they're for the microbes.
Yep.
And that's like, oh my God. So you're telling me that evolution is so smart that it put food for the journey in there to keep the microbes fed so that they're active when they get into the baby's gut. That to me, that's like, okay, come on. That's amazing.
Yeah, well, that's why we talk about the co-evolution of, the microbiome with the host. I mean, it goes hand in hand. It's generally speaking a symbiotic relationship, as you were saying when we started the show. The bacteria need the host, and the hosts have evolved to need the bacteria. And, when you get the bacteria out of whack, then not good things are going to happen to the host.
I have a strange feeling that fermented foods are better at doing what we want them to do as probiotic delivery systems. They've been around for thousands of years. And then, like they're not single strain, kimchi, but more importantly, I kind of feel like that has the built-in delivery system to get it down deep into your body where it probably is going to do a lot more for you. It's kind of like the Trojan horse that you need to get these microbes in deeper. Do you think that, or do either of you eat fermented foods?
I drink fermented beverages.
Fermented beverages.
Here, you're talking.
I'll also mention yogurt. That has a lot of beneficial bacteria, and we've known about how great bacteria in yogurt are for 100 years plus.
And we did a show on a store-bought kefir. I think it was a scientist from one of the UCs, actually. I'm almost positive it was. So they looked at the cancer patients who were in remission, and inflammation is a big problem because of the drugs that they take and all that sort of stuff. And they showed that this off-the-shelf kefir, I think it was Lifeway, don't hold me to it, but it was just your store-bought kefir, completely reduced several inflammatory markers dramatically, like drug-like effects, just by having 1 6-ounce glass a day. I mean, that is astonishing. And that's not even like the good kefir that you get from the Mennonite farmer who sells it at the farmer's market. Like that's the real good stuff. That's raw milk and everything.
Yeah, and this kind of information doesn't get out that well to the general public because, you've got people who would prefer a more pharmacological approach to a lot of these things and big companies and so forth. But, information like this, if it can be followed up with another study and get that information out to the public, that's what we need.
Yeah. Look, I want to thank you both for being here. It's a fascinating discussion. I hope that you'll remember Superhuman Radio when you get ready to publish another paper and let us help you break the news, because that's what this show is all about, bringing the science to the people when it's fresh and new, not when 10 years from now it becomes a thing and all these other people lost out because they didn't know about it. So that's all I like to do is just talk about this type of stuff. So keep us in mind. Thank you for being here. Have a great weekend. Take care.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you. And that's it for me. I don't have a show tomorrow. I'm off. Let's see here. We have a comment that popped up. Let's make sure I try not to. Thank you very much. Great show. Thank you. And that's it for today. My motorcycle is outside waiting for me. My work is done. I'm going to ride home and go see the lovely and talented Lisa Profumo and start my weekend. We'll see you next week. Don't forget, muscle is metabolic currency. So get into the gym and make a deposit today. And we will see more of you next week.